Redcoats and the expansion of the army. As the power and accuracy of firearms improved, steel breastplates and helmets became less effective, and the scarlet tunics of the British Army became the iconic item of uniform. Nevertheless, vestiges of breastplates remained as a badge of office in the form of gorgets. Items of armour and gorgets are displayed in the museum. Generations of British soldiers have worn the scarlet coat, the colour chosen so that their enemies would not see the extent of the blood from their wounds. A contemporary view from the 1680s was that soldiers are generally beloved of whores and lice because both are admirers of the scarlet coat. Another contemporary account quotes, ill-fed when fed at all, drowned in sea transports, when wounded, mangled by surgeons more akin to carpenters, on the march, shoeless and ragged, poorly paid when paid at all, and cut off from their nearest and dearest, dead. The following pages describe some of the extraordinary achievements of such scarlet battalions, from the restoration of the monarchy to the emergence of Napoleon. Scarlet coats are featured at intervals throughout the museum. Protestant Charles II was succeeded by his Roman Catholic son, James II. In 1685, the Protestant Duke of Monmouth mounted a rebellion. Opposition to James grew. Protestants invited the Dutch king, William of Orange, to the throne in the Glorious Revolution, and James fled to France. 5 companies of the Royals fought against the rebels at Sedgemoor. Duke of Monmouth knew the Royals from earlier service in France. Now with these opposite, he said, I know these men will fight. If I had them, I would not doubt of success. William appointed the Duke of Schomberg as Colonel of the Royals, an appointment previously held only by a Hebburn or a Douglas, and this was unpopular. Furthermore, the Scottish Parliament had not yet declared for William. The regiment was warned for service in Holland. Objecting, the regiment marched north to Scotland. William was lenient with the mutineers, but the first Mutiny Act was passed in order to balance the relationship between the King, Parliament, and the new standing army. In 1700, James II died in exile, proclaiming his son James III, later known as the Old Pretender, as king. There followed an alliance between Britain, various German principalities, Portugal and Sardinia on one hand, and between France and Spain on the other. The scene was set for the War of Spanish Succession. One of the great generals of all time, John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, inspired the army to win a series of famous victories that would affect the course of European history. King William ordered the Royals to embark for the continent under Marlborough's command. The 1st and 2nd Battalions served under Marlborough in all 4 of his major victories. Blenheim, Ramillies, Oudenarde, and Malplaquet, all awarded as battle honours. Oudenarde, failing light, hindered pursuit. It is recorded that the French withdrew, aided by the drums of the Allies beating the French retreat. Some thousands of prisoners were gleaned, although the harvest that would have been reaped in another hour of daylight was lost. After Malplaquet, Richard Coburn, an officer of the regiment, wrote, the action lasted 7 hours. They had 30 battalions more than we. Our battalion has lost an officer and 70 men and 1 wounded. We have taken 22 pieces of cannon. A French officer wrote, men were tearing at the muzzles of the muskets and bayonets that pierced their entrails, even gouging out their opponents' eyes with their fingernails, when the grip was so close that neither could make use of their weapons. It would have been impossible to find a more terrible representation of hell. On the eve of the Battle of Malplaquet, Private McBain of the Royals was confronted by his wife because, being a senior soldier, his wife was permitted to accompany him on a campaign. She complains, "It's been raining for a fortnight. I'm a drook it. My petticoats are all glore, right up to the knees. I've had enough. I'm awa' hame." "You cannae do that," cautions McBain. "Just watch me," retorts his wife. "But what about the bairn?" pleads McBain. "Because the previous week Mrs. McBain has borne him a baby son." "You can hear the bairn," says she, thrusting the baby into her husband's arm, and storms off. So on the eve of battle, Private McBain is left with his musket in one hand and his week old son in the other. What does he do? He places the baby into his knapsack, where it remains throughout the battle, and both father and son survive. Like a good regimental bairn, the son grows up and joins his father in the regiment. Master McBain being the youngest in the battle, Sergeant Heisland is the oldest, aged 89. A copy of a portrait of Heisland overlooks McBain and his son in the museum. There followed garrison duty in Ireland until 1742. The 2nd Battalion diary records that a sergeant and 10 men were sent to Tyrone, Fermanagh and Armagh, these being quoted to be "infested with Tories, robbers, rapparees, and other evil-disposed persons to the terror of His Majesty's subjects." The regiment was to have many similar deployments in the late 20th century. After 1742, the two battalions were usually separated to different theatres, and in 1743 the 1st Battalion moved to the continent in the Austrian War of Succession, during which it was involved in the Battle of Fontenoy. The following year, the 2nd Battalion became involved in the fight against the Young Pretender, culminating in the Battle of Culloden near Inverness, the last battle to be fought on British soil. A former manager of the Regimental Museum quotes, "On Culloden Moor, the Jacobite and government lines are indicated by flagpoles. Whenever I go there, I go to the right-hand flag of the government line because that is where the 2nd Battalion stood, at the right of the line. To our left were other Scottish regiments, the 21st of Foot, the 25th of Foot, and the Argyll Militia." On the day, Colonel Sinclair insisted that his 2nd Battalion stood in its rightful position at the right of the line. Standing opposite was the Jacobite army of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the Young Pretender. Charles was not an experienced soldier, but his senior general was. Lord George Murray had served in the Royals, but was of Jacobite persuasion and joined the rebel cause. On the day after the battle, Alexander Taylor of the 2nd Battalion wrote to his wife from Inverness. "It was a very cold, rainy morning with nothing to comfort us but ammunition loaf and not a dram of brandy to be had. We had great difficulty in keeping our firelocks dry. The battle began by cannonading. Then they took to their small arms, sword and pistol, and came running on our front line like troops of hungry wolves, and fought with intrepidity. Fire increasing, encouraged by the Duke and generals, they took plain flight." The full text of this letter is in the museum archive. Rivalry with France extended to the colonies in the Americas. The French held Canada in the north and Louisiana in the south, while the British colonies were on the eastern seaboard of today's United States. French intentions to link northern and southern colonies were thwarted in the 7 Years' War. The 2nd Battalion played a prominent part from Louisbourg to Havana, as illustrated in the remainder of this slide. The Royals were active elsewhere during the period, on both sides of the Atlantic. The scene was soon to be set for war against Napoleon.